Doug Whitaker didn't bother setting an alarm. On his ranch, the rooster, the dogs, and the Texas sun were enough to tell him what time it was. His morning started like every other. Black coffee, worn boots, and the low hum of cicadas buzzing round his porch. He'd built his life away from the polished picket fences of modern suburbia. And that's exactly how he liked it. He wasn't looking for trouble. But that morning, it came anyway. At the end of his gravel driveway, something foreign fluttered in the breeze. A white envelope pinned to his weathered gate with a zip tie from 50 yards away. It already looked official. Doug walked down, crunching gravel underfoot. Doug's pacing beside him. He pulled the envelope free and turned it over. There was a seal stamped in gold on the front. Hickory Hills Homeowners Association. Doug squinted. Hickory Hills was the shiny neighborhood development. To the west, rows of identical homes that had cropped up over the past decade like weeds after a rainstorm. They had lawn signs, weekend garage sales, and monthly newsletter meetings. Doug hadn't paid them much attention. He figured they stayed on their side of the hill, and he'd stay on his dot. Inside the envelope was a letter on crisp, high-weight paper, full of dense legal phrasing and bullet points. The tone was firm. It stated that Doug's property was visibly out of compliance with aesthetic standards, that it impacted home values, and most of all, that the HOA was prepared to offer a reasonable buyout offer to avoid forced litigation. He read the last line twice. We strongly urge you to consider selling your land to the board at fair market value before further action is necessary. Sent by 3 names he didn't recognize. Except one, Karen Melrose, HOA board president. Doug folded the letter in half and stuck it in the back pocket of his jeans. No panic, no anger, just a calm, steady walk back toward the house. Once inside, he opened the old metal safe buried in the back of his office closet. Dust rose as the door creaked open. Inside was a binder older than he was, leather-bound, marked with a faded brand from his grandfather's ranching days. Inside were hand-drawn maps, deeds, and lease agreements going back nearly 100 years. Doug sat at his desk, flipping pages until he found what he was looking for, a signed agreement dated 1973. It was a mineral rights lease, and more importantly, a land use contract. Turns out, when the original Hickory Hills development was approved, the builder hadn't bought the land. They leased a portion of it from Doug's father. 50 acres for underground sewage access, roads, and drainage lines. The deal was set up to expire after 50 years unless renewed. Doug checked the renewal clause. The deadline had passed. Quietly, last summer. And no one from the HOA had renewed it. Which meant every pipe, every underground system, and about 2 dozen backyard fence lines were technically encroaching on his land. And now, that same HOA standing unknowingly on expired rights had come asking him to sell his own property. He smelled, just a little. The dogs barked. Outside, the faint rumble of engines broke the silence. Doug stepped onto the porch. 3 electric golf carts kicked up a small dust trail as they rolled toward him. The first cart bore Karen Melrose, rigid and overdressed, gripping a clipboard. Behind her, a man in a blazer, probably their legal guy, and a third woman wearing a wide sun hat, already fanning herself. They pulled up without so much as a wave. Karen didn't even wait for Doug to speak. Mr. Whitaker, she said, climbing out, we're here on behalf of the board to discuss a civil resolution. Doug didn't flinch. You all lost or just pulled? Karen stiffened. The board has received multiple complaints. Odors, noise, livestock, visible decay, Our offer is a chance to resolve things amicably. Doug crossed his arms. This ain't a bake sale, lady. You think you can push me out, but I've been here longer than your concrete sidewalks. We'll be in touch through legal channels. The man in the blazer added, as if it were some kind of threat. They left a second envelope on the porch. This one thicker. Doug didn't pick it up. He walked back inside and opened his laptop. He had a contact at the county clerk's office and a cousin who specialized in real estate law. And by the time he was done, not only would the HOA regret showing up uninvited, they'd realize the land they built their kingdom on was never theirs to begin with. Doug didn't hear from the whore again for exactly 3 days, long enough to assume they'd either backed off or gone digging. He wasn't the type to underestimate people like Karen Melrose, entitled, suburban, and obsessed with rules that they believed only applied to others. He knew she'd be back, the kind of woman who didn't like unanswered ultimatums. Sure enough, on the 4th morning, Doug opened his front door to find a stack of printed violations shoved under the welcome mat. 7 sheets, 7 accusations, unsightly fencing, non-conforming livestock proximity to HOA border, unauthorized access road crossing into common grounds, animal odor complaint, noise disturbance, early tractor use, unapproved shed, roofing material, expired zoning application assumed. Doug read each one while sipping coffee on the porch, barely blinking. There was no envelope this time, just the printouts, like junk mail with legal spice. But what caught his attention wasn't what was written, it was what wasn't. Nowhere in the violations was there any acknowledgement of property boundaries. The whore, either arrogantly or foolishly, believed that Doug's outer acres fell under their aesthetic jurisdiction. They'd built their homes up to his tree line years ago, planted a common use playground near his west field, and ran a hiking trail that snaked past his old he shed, and now they were accusing him of breaking their rules. Doug walked out to his barn and unlocked the side wall cabinet. Inside were trail cams, the kind usually used for hog watching. He mounted one facing the property line, another near the fence, and a third on a high pole overlooking the shared access road. He didn't need just proof of harassment. He needed to show the world what the whore didn't realize they'd stepped into. Later that afternoon, he drove into town, not to stir trouble, but to quietly start stacking his cards. First stop, the county records office. He requested certified copies of the expired land lease, then a plat map showing precise boundaries. Then he requested something special, utility overlays. It took a while to process, but the clerk eventually handed him what he needed, a highlighted blueprint showing the Hickory Hills development's entire sewer system ran under his land. On the drive home, Doug passed by one of the HOA's newer, no trespassing private residence only signs. It stood crooked at the corner of a community dog park. Ironically, that same park sat 15 feet into the section of the land that used to belong to the Whitaker family orchard, a piece still covered under the lease, now expired. Doug smiled. That night, Karen emailed him directly, subject line, immediate attention required. Body. Failure to respond to community violations may result in escalating fines. The board is willing to offer a final buyout. Please contact us before Monday to avoid legal escalation. Doug didn't reply. Instead, he posted a single message on his Facebook page, one that had been quiet for years. Before you try to evict the roots, make sure the land doesn't belong to the tree. Within hours, the post was shared locally, and then outside the community. A few former HOA residents commented, recalling Karen's past feuds. One person said she once fined them for painting their door beige instead of sandstone. Another said she shut down their lemonade stand because it didn't file a temporary sales form. Doug wasn't looking for sympathy. He was setting the stage. The HOA thought they were pressuring an old rancher into folding. They didn't know he'd been gathering documents, photos, and drone footage. Preparing something far bigger than just a response. A plan was forming, one that wouldn't just refuse their offer, but show every resident in Hickory Hills exactly who owned the ground beneath their feet. By the time Friday rolled around, the temperature had hit 93 degrees before noon, and the buzz around Hickory Hills was hotter than the weather. Karen Melrose had doubled down on her crusade. Her latest HOA newsletter distributed to every mailbox in a plastic wrap packet featured a full-page warning about unauthorized agricultural activity encroaching on shared community space. Doug's name wasn't printed anywhere, but he didn't need it to be. The language was sharp enough to slice a fence post. But Doug wasn't the type to panic. Instead, he sat on his porch, boots kicked up on the rail, slowly turning pages of the lease agreement now framed and laminated like it was the morning paper. That was when the white Ford Explorer rolled up the gravel drive, not a golf cart. This time, the seal on the side read Municipal Code Enforcement. Doug leaned forward, then stood, brushing dust off his jeans. A thin man with a clipboard stepped out of the SUV, wearing sunglasses and a badge around his neck. He looked out of place in polished shoes on ranch gravel. "Morning," Doug called, already walking down the porch steps. The inspector cleared his throat. "Are you Mr. Whitaker?" Doug nodded. "Here on behalf of a zoning complaint submitted by Hickory Hills Homeowners Association. Routine inspection. Just need to verify some structure compliance and confirm property use." Doug gave a slow, thoughtful blink. "You got a warrant?" The inspector shifted his feet. "It's an administrative visit, voluntary, but we can escalate if..." Doug didn't let him finish. "You're standing on private property. Unless you've got probable cause or a signed order, you'll need to leave now." The man hesitated. "Sir, it's just a basic site check." Doug held out a folder. "This here's the deed. County stamped. See that section?" He pointed to a highlighted clause. "Not only do I own the land, I own the strip Hickory House is sitting on, including the utility trench that runs under Karen Melrose's backyard." That got the inspector's attention. Doug continued. "Which means this little zoning dance is a waste of both our time. But here's the kicker, your boss already signed off on a boundary confirmation 2 days ago. Clerk's record. Want a copy?" The inspector didn't say anything for a moment. Then, slowly, he took the folder, scanned the top pages, and stepped back. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Whitaker," he said, voice noticeably lower. "I'll file a closure on this one." Doug nodded once, then turned around without another word, and walked back to his porch. From inside the SUV, the inspector radioed someone. Doug caught a few phrases through the open driver window. "Verified. Deed. Incorrect complaint origin." And finally, false zoning alert. Likely retaliatory. Doug didn't need to hear more. But he wasn't done. He waited until the Explorer vanished down the road, then pulled out his phone. He called his cousin Jesse, who worked in civil land litigation. "They're escalating," Doug said flatly. "Think we're ready for step 2. Jesse laughed on the other end. "You mean public records drop?" "Absolutely. Just say when." That night, Doug uploaded a simple post to the county's public record portal and allowed action under their Freedom of Information Access Clause. He attached the full lease agreement, the expired renewal date, the confirmed property lines, and a single-page cover memo titled Legal Ownership and Utility Access Rights Affected by HOA Activity, F. Or Community Awareness. He didn't blast it on social media. He didn't send it to the HOA directly. But within 24 hours, dozens of Hickory Hills residents were talking. Some found the post during property research. Others heard whispers at the dog park. One homeowner posted in the private Facebook group, "Does anyone know if this is real? Are we actually on leased land?" By Saturday evening, a second post appeared, this time from someone named Michelle Ramirez, who lived on Birch Loop. "Karen fined me $250 for a bird bath. But now I'm finding out she might not even have authority here. We need a meeting." Doug didn't comment. He didn't need to. He had just put a fuse in place and the neighborhood was about to light it for him. By Monday morning, the Hickory Hills Facebook group had gone from backyard barbecue chatter to full-blown wildfire. Residents who used to post about fertilizer brands were now dropping screenshots of Doug's lease documents like they were part of a true crime podcast. One post read, "So we've been living on someone else's land for a year, and Karen didn't say a word." Karen Melrose, for the first time since the community was built, had lost control of the narrative. Doug didn't gloat. He didn't post memes. He didn't even respond to the rumors. Instead, he walked into the Hickory County Community Center and handed a clipboard to the front desk. "Meeting room, 2 hours. Public land ownership discussion. I'll cover the rental fee." The clerk looked up from her computer, slightly amused, expecting a crowd. Doug offered a quiet smile. "I think a few folks might show up." He posted a single flyer near the HOA's main bulletin board. "Community Land Use Forum, Wednesday at 6 p.m. Everyone welcome. Bring questions." He didn't list his name. He didn't need to. By Wednesday night, the parking lot was full. Lawn chairs were dragged inside to supplement the metal folding seats. Couples leaned against the walls. Teenagers scrolled their phones. But they stayed. Doug waited until 5 minutes past 6 before stepping to the front. He wore his usual jeans, boots, a warm flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, nothing fancy. But when he pulled out the original lease document and held it up, the room went completely still. Doug spoke plainly. "My family has been here for 3 generations, and in 1973, the original developer of Hickory Hills came to my father asking for a deal, one that would allow them to build roads and bury utility lines through part of our land. It was a 50-year lease. Last year, that lease expired. No one renewed it, which means everything built on top of it since is now trespassing on private property." A few gasps broke out. Some homeowners shifted in their chairs, whispering. Doug continued, "I've stayed quiet because I figured folks didn't know, but your HOA board did, or they should have, and instead of talking, they tried to find me, friend me, and send a zoning officer to my gate. Now they're threatening you too, issuing violations that don't hold water." From the back of the room, a voice rang out. "Why didn't the HOA tell us about the lease expiring?" Doug didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a large, printed map of Hickory Hills, this time overlaid with property lines. Redding traced every section that technically crossed onto his land: backyards, pathways, a retention pond, even part of the HOA's community clubhouse. The room broke into murmurs. Another resident stood. "Are you saying we're all paying dues to people who don't legally control the land?" Doug raised a hand. "I'm not here to tear down anyone's home. I'm not filing lawsuits. But I am here to make one thing clear. I'm not selling, I'm not moving, and I won't be threatened out of my family's land." That's when someone in the corner raised her hand. It was Michelle Ramirez, the same woman who'd posted online about her $250 bird bath fine. Her voice was steady. "We want to vote to remove Karen. If she's been lying about something this big, She doesn't belong on the board. Applause broke out. Not everyone joined in. Some looked stunned, others unsure. But the momentum was shifting. Doug saw it clearly. Back home, Doug stood on his porch again, watching the dust settle over the fence line. His dogs were quiet, the crickets loud in the distance. He could still see the glow of porch lights from Hickory Hills. His phone buzzed. Message from his cousin Jesse. You ready for phase 2? This is where it gets interesting. Doug replied with just one word. Tomorrow. Because while the town meeting had rattled the HOA's walls, the next step would crack their foundation wide open. The morning after the town meeting, Karen Melrose stood in front of the Hickory Hills clubhouse window, staring out across the manicured lawn. Her reflection in the glass looked tense. The vote rumors were spreading fast. Michelle Ramirez had started a petition, and someone else had posted a copy of the expired lease right beside the community mailboxes. She'd worked too hard to let this slip. Karen tapped a red folder on the counter beside her, the one marked emergency legal action. It wasn't real legal power, just a collection of letters she'd pre-written with the HOA's letterhead. But sometimes the illusion of authority was enough. This time, she wasn't going to play defense. She was going to take the fight to Doug's front door. By noon, she marched across the dusty Boundary Road with a small entourage, Brad Thomas, her legal puppet, and a security guard from the HOA's private patrol company. They brought to cameras, clipboards, and a printed sign on a stake. Doug saw them coming from the porch. He didn't move. Karen stopped just short of the tree line and planted the sign in the dirt. It read, "Cease and desist. Illegal use of HOA. Utility infrastructure. Immediate compliance required." Then, she turned toward the porch and yelled, "You're in violation of obstruction ordinances. If you don't comply, we'll involve the county." Doug finally stood, calm as ever, holding a thick envelope in his hand. "You might want to read this before you plant any more signs," he said, walking down to the fence line. He handed it to Brad, not Karen. Brad opened it and began reading, his brow creased by the second page. Karen leaned over his shoulder. "What is it?" Doug answered for him. "It's a formal notice of termination of utility access, certified and recorded yesterday morning. Your water line, your sewer main, even your storm drains, they all run through my land. That lease expired, and now, without a renewal or agreement in place, every inch of your underground system is trespassing." Karen tried to speak, but Doug raised his voice just enough. "And since you chose to escalate instead of negotiate, I've already filed for injunction, which means in 72 hours, I have the legal right to block, cap, or reroute anything flowing through my cell." Brad looked pale. "You can't shut off utilities to an entire community." "I'm not shutting anything off," Doug said flatly. "The lease expired. I'm enforcing my property rights." Karen snapped. "This is extortion. You can't just cut off our homes. We'll sue you." Doug didn't blink. "You're welcome to try, but be warned, if your board tries to bypass the injunction or dig a single hole on my land, I'll have you up for trespassing and damages. And I guarantee you, my attorney's hungrier than yours." Brad quietly stepped back. Karen, now red in the face, yanked the posted sign out of the dirt and stormed back toward the road. Doug didn't follow. He just turned, walked back up his steps, and sat with his coffee like nothing had happened. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Jesse pulled up in his pickup. Doug handed him a thumb drive with all the camera footage, correspondence, and land contracts. Jesse laughed as he scrolled through it on his laptop in the passenger seat. "This is gold. Karen thought she could drown you in paper. Instead, she just handed you the rope." Doug nodded. I don't want to destroy the neighborhood. I just want her out. You keep playing it like this, and they'll run her out themselves. The next morning, Doug woke up to three things. A voicemail from the county utility commissioner requesting a meeting. A text from Michelle Ramirez. Karen tried to find someone for painting their mailbox. They laughed in her face, and a flyer tucked into his fence post. Special HOA meeting. Emergency board vote called when picked up slightly, flipping the corner of the flyer. Doug smiled. The storm was shifting, but the real flood was still on its way. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Saturday night in the Hickory Hills clubhouse. And word spread faster than a wildfire in dry brush. Every resident knew what it was really about. Karen called it a community update session, but everyone knew it was her last move to hold onto control. Rumors whispered through the cul-de-sacs that she planned to shut down any talk of removal. Doug didn't plan to attend until he heard what Karen was setting up behind closed doors. Michelle Ramirez texted him Friday night. She's rigging the voting roster. Only hand-picked residents. Anyone with complaints is being denied access. She's saying the rest aren't in good standing. Doug stared at the message. Then he opened his drawer, pulled out the flash drive he and Jesse had been building, and loaded the final documents onto it. He didn't need to make noise. All he needed to do was plug it in. Saturday night, the clubhouse was packed. Karen stood at the front wearing a lavender suit, flanked by Brad and a clipboard holding assistants. The room was tense, split between residents who still believed in her control and those who had started to see through the curtain. She opened with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for attending this scheduled update on ongoing land use concerns. Before we begin, please note that only residents in compliance are permitted to vote tonight. A few voices shouted back immediately. That's not in the bylaws. You can't exclude people for disagreeing with you. Karen raised her hand like a school principal. It's all within procedural rights, I assure you. Doug walked through the doors 15 minutes in. Heads turned. Karen went rigid. He didn't say a word, just walked straight to the side wall where the projector computer sat. Excuse me, this is private board. Karen started, but stopped when she saw Michelle hand Doug a remote. With one click, the screen behind Karen blinked from the HOA logo to an overhead satellite photo of Hickory Hills. Colored boundary lines appeared next, red, yellow, and blue zones. Then came text overlays. Hickory Hills construction zones built on expired private lease land. Murmurs spread across the room. Karen stepped forward. This is misinformation. This is out of order. Doug's voice finally caught in. It's public record, pulled from the county registrar's portal. Signed by the original developer and notarized in 1973. Lease expired July 12th last year. No renewal. Which means you've been collecting dues and enforcing codes on land you no longer control. Someone shouted. Is this real? Doug tapped the remote again. Up came Scandy Mills between Karen and a legal advisor obtained legally by Jesse through a discovery request in preparation for future filing. One message, sent 6 months ago, read, "We're aware the lease hasn't been renewed. Recommend not mentioning it to the board until we secure Doug's property outright." Karen's face went pale. Those were private communications. Brad looked like he wanted to vanish. Doug didn't stop. Next slide. Trail cam photos from Doug's fence line, showing HOA workers trespassing to post signs. Another, a utility diagram proving the community's sewer main ran through his land without a current right dash of dash access. The room exploded in noise. Some people stood up, angry. Others looked stunned. Betrayed. A man in the back shouted, "You You knew the lease was gone and you still fine me for building a patio? Karen tried to speak, but Brad stepped away from her and walked out the door without a word. Michelle grabbed the mic. I motion a vote for immediate removal of Karen Melrose from the board. Effective tonight. The applause was thunderous. The count wasn't even close. Karen didn't wait to hear the final tally. She shoved her papers into her bag, stormed out, and nearly tripped over her own clipboard on the way to her car. Doug didn't say a word. As the residents gathered, dozens of them surrounded him, not with pitchforks, but with questions, handshakes, even apologies. They weren't angry at him anymore. They were angry they'd been lied to. Later that night, Jesse called. She gone? Doug watched Karen's SUV pull away down the street. Voted out. Publicly, Jesse whistled. Well, cowboy, you broke the board? Doug didn't smile. Not yet. Because the whore wasn't the only thing sitting on his land, and the next part of the story was going to hit them in the pocket where it hurt most. Doug Whitaker had lived through blizzards, droughts, and wildfires, but nothing compared to the storm now brewing within the whore board. Karen and her cronies had pushed too far, too fast. And as the pressure mounted, the cracks began to show. He wasn't just dealing with property disputes anymore. He was unraveling a web of greed that ran deeper than anyone imagined. Late one evening, Doug sat in his office with Emmer and Curtis. Blueprints were spread across the desk. Emmer was cross-referencing land parcel data with lease agreements while Curtis sifted through bank statements and local government filings they'd quietly pulled using public records access. What they found didn't just confirm Doug's suspicions, it shattered the illusion of the HOA's legitimacy. There's no way this is legal, Emma whispered, tapping a highlighted figure in the scanned documents. Karen's been funneling HOA funds into a shell landscaping company, and that company is owned by her nephew. Over $280,000 in 3 years. Doug leaned back, arms crossed. So, they've been stealing from their own community to keep their claws on this land. Curtis nodded. And here's the kicker. The HOA's operating charter expired 2 years ago. They've been acting without legal authority. All their rules, all their fines, completely unenforceable. Doug didn't smile. Odd something sharper lit behind his eyes. The next morning, Doug requested a private meeting with two of the quieter whore board members, Lisa Mahoney and James Barrick. He knew they weren't loyal to Karen out of love. They were terrified of what she'd do if they broke ranks. Over coffee at a local diner, Doug laid it out for them: land ownership, the fraudulent business trail, the expired charter, and Karen's manipulation of every resident. Lisa's hands trembled as she read the printouts. She told us everything was legal, that you were the threat. Doug shook his head. She's using all of you to keep control, and she's going to let you take the fall when it all burns down. James looked away, conflicted. We didn't sign up for this, but you're in it now, Doug said, and the only way out is forward. Help me set this right. Later that night, at an emergency HOA meeting called by Karen herself, Lisa did something no one expected. She stood up mid-agenda and asked for the floor. Karen, I've reviewed the board's financials, she said loudly, and I have serious concerns. Karen's smile didn't even flicker. This isn't the time, Lisa. Lisa didn't sit. It's exactly the time. You've been using HOA money to fund your family's businesses. That's embezzlement. Murmurs rose in the crowd of attending homeowners. Karen's mask cracked for the first time, her voice sharp. Sit down before you embarrass yourself. James stood next. She's not the one embarrassing herself. Karen froze. The room went silent. Eyes turned toward her. Doug watched from the back corner, arms folded. a quiet spectator as the board began to implode. The seeds he planted were growing roots pushing up from under the HOA's fake foundation. Karen's voice dropped into a hiss. "You don't know what you're doing." Lisa turned to the crowd. "Yes, we do. We're reclaiming our community." In a matter of minutes, the meeting dissolved into chaos. Residents demanded answers. Several stormed the stage, waving printed emails and overdue invoices they'd never authorized. Curtis stepped up with a small speaker and played a secretly recorded conversation of Karen mocking the homeowners she claimed to serve. It was over in under an hour. Karen left the meeting with clenched fists and a hollow stare, refusing to speak to anyone. But Doug knew the war wasn't over yet. He hadn't even made his move. That night, he quietly filed paperwork with the county clerk's office. The original deed from his grandfather, never voided, never transferred, was still valid, and with it, the leases that gave the HOA their legal footing evaporated like dust in the wind. All he needed now was the final piece, one that would make every resident stop, listen, and choose a side. And it was sitting in his mailbox the next morning, a certified letter from a state judge. Doug held it in his hand, exhaled slowly, and said just 3 words: "Now it's time." Shadows stretched long over the ranch as the sun dipped below the hills. Tomorrow wouldn't just change the HOA, it would change everything. Doug Whitaker's boots sank into the wet gravel outside the courtroom as the gavel fell behind him. The civil suit was over, but the real reckoning was only beginning. His ranch was no longer a target. It was now the spotlight. Reporters had shown up every morning that week, filming over the fence line and interviewing neighbors who'd been unknowingly living on land leased from Doug's family trust. But today, Doug had something much bigger in motion. The legal victory had turned the tables. But Karen Rails and her HOA weren't done playing dirty. Her final card had been retaliation, filing complaints with the county about Doug's so-called zoning violations, hoping to get his property locked up in red tape. The complaints were anonymous on paper, but everyone knew whose handwriting had scrawled the forms. Doug didn't bother confronting Karen directly. He didn't have to. That morning, his attorneys filed a termination notice on the land lease beneath the HOA's Central Park, clubhouse, and 5 adjoining homes. The very land the HOA claimed gave them authority. It legally reverted back to Doug in 60 days. Doug's foreman, Jake, walked alongside him as they returned to the ranch truck. "You think they're going to realize what's happening before it's too late?" Doug cracked a tired smile. "They'll know when the surveyors show up next week. I'm putting in a hay barn where their tennis court used to be." Jake laughed. But the tension hadn't faded. The neighborhood wasn't just facing a lawsuit. They were standing on borrowed dirt. HOA board members scrambled, trying to draft emergency measures, appealed to the county, and even offered Doug money to reverse the lease termination. But none of them knew what Doug had recently uncovered. Inside a dusty tin box in his barn office, Doug had found the original hand-drawn plats from 1932, signed by the county surveyor and stamped by his grandfather, who had sold off parcels of land with conditions built into every deed. The HOA's founders had overlooked one major clause: if the HOA used its authority to target or displace the ranch property for non-public purposes, the leases could be immediately nullified without compensation. Doug's grandfather had prepared for this long before Karen was ever born. As news spread, neighbors began turning on the board. Karen was stripped of her title in a last-minute emergency meeting. Her former allies quickly flipped sides, some begging Doug for mercy, others demanding she be held accountable. But Doug wasn't interested in punishment. He had something more permanent in mind. He called a town hall meeting, not in the HOA clubhouse, but in the old grain barn his grandfather had built. Dozens of neighbors filled the room, sitting on hay bales, unsure of what to expect. Doug stood at the front, calm but firm. "You've lived here a long time," he said. "Some of you were born here. Some of you are raising your kids here. That should matter more than what someone in a vest and clipboard thinks." He paused as murmurs rippled through the room. "I'm not here to kick anyone out, but I won't be bullied off my land either. So here's what's going to happen. I'm offering the HOA a new agreement. You drop every complaint, restore the fence you tore down, and replace every tree you bulldozed. And in exchange, I'll sign a 99-year lease for $1. Gasps filled the room. Even Jake looked up in shock. Doug continued. "But Karen doesn't get to stay. She violated that trust. She doesn't speak for this land anymore. This is your neighborhood now. Act like it." The crowd erupted. Some clapped, others cried. Karen stood silently at the back, cheeks flushed, knowing it was over. In the weeks that followed, the fences were rebuilt, higher this time, with Doug's horses grazing safely behind them. The clubhouse was converted into a community center, with Doug's blessing, and the land he nearly lost, it remained right where it had always been, rooted in generations of quiet strength. As fall rolled in, Doug stood on his porch sipping coffee. He watched as neighborhood kids rode bikes past the edge of the ranch. The HOA signs had come down. The bitterness had faded, and peace had returned, not because he fought fire with fire, but because he remembered who he was and what that land truly meant. And for the first time in months, the only sound he heard was the wind through the grass, the same wind his grandfather had once stood in, defending the same soil, against the same kind of arrogance. Some things never change, and that's exactly how Doug liked it.